My last video got a response I genuinely did not expect. I had gone through the entire Finspire Fellowship application with almost no information, no one to talk to, no resource that actually explained what it was. So I made a video about it, hoping it would help at least a few people. The comments, the DMs, the number of people asking for a part 2, it was genuinely heartwarming. And I kept saying I'd make it soon. But then my exams kept me occupied for most of the month, and here we are. A little later than I'd hoped, but I'm glad I finally sat down to make this. In this video, I'm going to take you through what the experience was actually like for me. The people, the sessions, what I took away, and I'll be sharing some tips for those of you who have already been selected on how to make the absolute most of it. So, if that's you, make sure you stay till the end. I want to start from the very beginning. This was my first time traveling alone. No parents, no friends coming along, just me and my bag on the way to Hyderabad. And I know that might sound like a small thing, but for me, it already felt like something was shifting. There was this strange mix of nerves and excitement from the moment I got to the airport. Then I arrived in Hyderabad, and the first thing that hit me was, this does not feel real. Because when you've just started college, you're still figuring out whether you even belong in these spaces. You don't have internships, you don't have a polished resume, you're very early in the journey. And yet D. Shaw, one of the most respected firms in the world, had flown me out, put me up, and essentially said, "We want to invest in you." That feeling took a while to settle. But the moment I met the other fellows and walked into that first session, something clicked. This was real, and I had earned my place in it. Let me talk about the people first, because the cohort is honestly what I think about the most when I look back on this. The welcome session was the first time we were all in a room together, and there was this immediate sense that everyone was genuinely excited. Not performatively, just actually glad to be there. And then we went straight into a session on the financial services industry. A broad overview of how the industry is structured, where different firms sit within it, where D.E. Shaw fits in. I remember thinking within that first hour that I was already learning things I hadn't encountered in any classroom. But coming back to the people, what struck me was that D.E. Shaw doesn't just select smart people, they select interesting people. Some of my best conversations that week had nothing to do with finance. It was about what people were reading, what they were working on, what they genuinely cared about. And being surrounded by that kind of energy naturally made me want to show up better. Don't treat the cohort as competition. These are people you'll stay in touch with, people whose paths will cross with yours in ways you can't predict right now. Invest in those relationships genuinely. There were a few sessions I want to talk about specifically. The one I think about most is the fighting self-doubt and imposter syndrome session. I know that might sound like an odd one to highlight, but hear me out. When you're sitting in that environment, surrounded by people who all seem incredibly put together, that feeling of not quite belonging can creep in. Having someone from D.E. Shaw address it directly and honestly, not as a formality, but in a way that felt real, genuinely helped me. I think a lot of people in that room felt the same way. There was also a session called Decis Women in Finance. Sitting in a room listening to women who had built serious careers at D.E. Shaw was something else entirely. It wasn't a panel where people gave rehearsed advice. It was honest, it was candid, and it was genuinely motivating in a way I didn't fully anticipate going in. Finance is a much wider field than it appears from the outside, and the unconventional roles in finance session made that very clear. Hearing from people who had taken paths that weren't the obvious ones pushed me to think differently about what I actually wanted to do, not just what seemed like the default option. And there was an interview and resume tip session. Very practical, very direct. Even if you don't have much on your resume yet, pay close attention. The advice is genuinely applicable and you will need it sooner than you think. But here's something I want to say about the fellowship that goes beyond the sessions. Because it wasn't just about sitting in a room and learning. One of the activities we did was an employee engagement workshop where we made glass paintings. And I know that might sound random, but that was one of the most fun things I did the entire time. It broke the ice in a way no formal session could have. You're collaborating, you're laughing, you're making something with people you met less than 48 hours ago. It reminded me that the fellowship is designed to be an experience, not just a curriculum. And that balance is something I really appreciated. Now, the access to DE Shaw professionals. This is what I want to talk about next. I went in assuming it would be the standard format, a polished presentation, a few questions, very formal. That is not what it was. The people I got to speak with were remarkably open. They talked about their actual work, not a sanitized version of it. They shared how they thought about problems, what the early part of their careers looked like, where things didn't go as planned. And it wasn't from the front of a lecture hall. It was in conversations where you could actually go deeper. The one thing I would tell you, don't ask generic questions. What advice would you give someone starting out? Leads nowhere interesting. Think beforehand about something you're genuinely curious about or confused by and ask that. The more specific and honest the question, the better the conversation, and the more you'll actually be remembered. Looking back, what I took away was a split between the technical and the personal. On the technical side, I left with a much more coherent picture of what finance actually is. Not one thing, but a wide landscape. I had a clearer sense of it after 3 days than I'd managed to build in the months before. But what I found more valuable was getting a clear sense of what I didn't know. That sounds counterintuitive, but it's one of the most useful things that can happen early on. Before this, I didn't know what I didn't know. Afterwards, I had a clear direction. The imposter syndrome session also landed differently in retrospect. Sitting with it afterwards, I realized that everyone in that room was still figuring things out, even the people who seemed to have it completely sorted. There was something quietly reassuring about that. And then there's the confidence piece. Harder to quantify, but very real. Doing something like this early in your college journey, a professional environment that takes you seriously, shifts something in how you carry yourself, and that shift doesn't go away. If you have been selected, everything from here is for you. Be proactive, not passive. Don't wait for the experience to come to you. If you have a question in a session, ask it. If there's a professional you want to speak with, find the moment and approach them. The fellowship gives you access, but access only means something if you actually use it. Engage, don't just attend. There's a real difference between being in a room and being present. You'll notice very quickly who's genuinely in it and who's just going through the motions. Be the person who's actually thinking, actually contributing, willing to say something even when it feels slightly uncomfortable. That's where the real learning happens. Build genuine friendships with your cohort. Not the surface level kind where you exchange contacts and move on. Sit with different people at different meals. Ask about people beyond the standard opener, which college you're from. The connections you make there are worth holding on to. Ask bold, specific questions in every session with every professional you speak to. The quality of what you get out of any conversation is directly tied to what you bring into it. Come prepared. Know what you actually want to understand. And finally, let yourself be fully present, not just in the sessions, but in all of it. The activities, the meals, the conversations in between. The fellowship is designed to be more than just a learning program, and you'll only feel that if you're actually in it. Don't be so focused on making an impression that you forget to just experience it. That's everything I wanted to cover. I hope this gave you a real sense of what the experience is like and how to go into it prepared. If you have questions about anything, drop them in the comments. And if you have been selected this year, do let me know down below. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.